And I think we're live.
Oh my gosh. Courtney's like Johnny on the spot.
Wow, Courtney's the first person on there. Oh, she might have, that might have been tagged from the other day. I saw her tag that earlier. She was tagged.
Okay.
But that might be why that.
Give her credit for being the early bird anyway.
Oh yeah, we're on live on the actual page, so that's good. So if you guys are tuning in, if you can let us know you're out there. Facebook likes to wait a few seconds before we actually get into everything, but feel free to let us know you're there in the comments. And if you have anyone you want to share this with, feel free to share the link as well. Hopefully we do have some people on there. Oh, there we go. Al, who's using Valerie's Facebook page. We're on to you now, Al, is there.
Lars from New Orleans, yay. And Suzanne.
Suzanne Locker. Sonia's there. Edmund's there. Andrew's there. Kendall's there. Pat's here. Lots of names I recognize, so that's really cool.
Andrew, hope you're feeling better. I saw that you had been under the weather.
Well,
we've got some help for this topic on here too, so you guys are not getting off. We know who you are.
Yeah, some of you guys are trainers already, so that's good. You can weigh in with best practices that you've been doing. All right, I have to go close my door. So talk amongst yourself a second.
Okay. No pressure here. So as soon as Robin gets her door closed, here she's back.
Yeah. I feel like I'm watching an old Magic Mirror episode. Oh my goodness. Well, I'm not in my RV today, so it should be a little bit calmer. So we are glad everybody's joining us. We have gotten more questions on this topic in the past 3 weeks than I think we've had all combined in the past several years. So we're looking forward to talking about hiring a trainer. So for those of you that have been around like since ABKA times, like those I don't want to say old. What's another better word? Seasoned.
Yes.
Seasoned folks. Susan and I actually have done a presentation before on why pet care facilities and trainers should work together. And people were always interested in the topic, and then they would just nod their head and go like, that sounds like a good idea, but yeah, we're not going to do that. And so we've actually been trying to recommend this for a while. And obviously from COVID now, people are starting to see the value of diversifying and the value of actually adding a trainer. So really, it's been amazing to see all the questions we've been getting. So that's kind of been exciting for us. Do you have the Ancient Mariners, ABKA?
I know.
That's awesome. Do you have anything you want to add, or do you want to just jump into the topic, Susan?
Jump in.
All right, so let's go ahead and ask questions that you might have. I have kind of a list of things that we've been getting asked, and I'll try to cover as many as I can, but we also want to answer whatever questions you guys have too. So feel free to your comments in the comment section, and we'll be checking that as we go along. But the first thing I would say about hiring a dog trainer for your facility is, number one, know what your philosophy is on training. And we're not going to get into all those different types of philosophies. All I'm going to say is, whatever your philosophy is, you need to hire a trainer that has a similar mindset. So if you don't, it's just not going to work. You're just going to be butting heads all the time. So when you're hiring someone, and a good example is, I'll use myself. I'm what's called a crossover trainer, which means many years ago, I started training and I used tools and methods that I don't use now. And I primarily am positive reinforcement trainer. I do clicker training. So if I was going to hire someone, I would be looking for someone that has those similar philosophies to me. Because if you don't, then you're just constantly going to be battling, like, why are you doing it that way? Or why are you doing it this way? And so just save yourself the trouble. Understand your training philosophy. And your training philosophy is going to go very much hand in hand with your philosophy on how you handle dogs in your center. And so whatever you're teaching your handlers, your dog handlers, you need to hire a trainer that is going to agree with those same methods. So anything else?
Yeah, I think I just want to interject because if you don't, you're going to cause confusion to the pet parents across your services. And I can tell a story from when we were at Urban Tales, and one of my business partners, when we opened the business, was our trainer, and she left to go overseas with her husband for a few years, and she was desperate to find somebody before she left. And then in time, it became very clear that the philosophies didn't line up, and it did cause issues. Our clients were concerned, and it was a real lesson learned. So I agree with you, Robin, where it just really have that clarity of overall what fits into your business culture and philosophies on pet handling.
Yeah, and I did, Kimberly said a good point. Occasionally you find out later their philosophy is not truly aligned. So a few things that I like to ask if I'm gonna bring someone in terms of trying to figure out what their philosophy is, and this is what I generally teach pet parents, but the same thing is true for a pet care facility owner, is, talk about, if you're interviewing a trainer, a dog trainer, talk about kind of how they teach things, get an idea of tools they use, tools they're comfortable with or not comfortable with. I like to ask, and this came from, I don't remember, it's been around for a while. I didn't come up with this, somebody else did, but kind of asking them, what do you do if the dog doesn't respond to a cue that you've provided to them? Like, what's your response to that? And that can tell you a lot about what their training philosophy is. Are they going to say, well, I'm going to just wait and see if they try the right thing? Or am I going to yell at them or punish them? Or am I going to just try to work on training some more because they haven't learned it? Like, you can learn a lot just from that question. So asking those questions really help. And then I think really asking what are the tools that you typically would recommend? And those can run the gamut from, treats to a leash to collar, crates, whatever. But some of those questions can help as well. So that's the first thing, is really understanding that you want to hire someone that's aligned with your philosophy to begin with. So, and you have to know what that is for yourself before you go out and look for a trainer. And we would hope that for most of you, we would hope that for all of you, that is positive reinforcement and fear-free, force-free, but maybe it's not, in which case you just make sure that you hire someone that's going to match your philosophy. The second thing that I always tell people is you want to figure out what they're going to do. And there's kind of the thinking of, I'll bring a trainer in and then they'll tell me what I want or what I need. But to some extent, I think that's kind of risky. I think at the very least, you have to understand what your goal is as the facility owner for that trainer. And what I mean by that is, do you want them to offer group classes? Do you want them to offer private lessons? Do you want them to offer behavior modification? Do you want them to offer educational classes for your pet parents? Do you want them to train your staff? Do you want, there's a whole bunch of stuff a trainer can do. So when you just go out and you go, hey, I'm hiring a trainer is going to say, what do you want me to do? And if you say whatever you want, most trainers are going to be like, well, that's a lot of work for me to figure it all out. Like, you need to have some kind of an idea of what you want. And you might start with just one thing. You might tell that trainer, here's a whole list of things that we can do, but let's just focus initially on helping my staff and maybe doing some private lessons or some refresher training. Like, start small, and then you can build on things as you start to get more comfortable with that person you've hired.
And I would start, I think, Robin, with maybe what you're getting your current clients, if they've been asking you to help with anything, or what you maybe have been referring out for. If you're referring out for basic obedience, or you're referring out for more private things, because I think knowing your own market and your own clients, if that's where you're going to start to build this training revenue, is an important place to start. Maybe you have a lot of puppies and have other puppy programs that, some more formal obedience directed puppy programs would be a good place to start. I think really assessing what your current clients would like is one place to also look at that.
Yeah, and I would say when you're hiring someone, if you or someone on your staff is not already experienced as a trainer, then I would be looking for someone with education and credentials. In other words, unless you're going to you know a little bit about how to train somebody to become a trainer, or what you've been a trainer before and you really know what you're looking for, and you can monitor that person. If you don't have that kind of a position in place, then you have two choices. You can bring someone on and then send them to school, which is a great option, or you could take a current employee and send them to a school to learn, and gradually I would do some kind of a payback where if you're going to pay for them to go to school and get the education, they're required to work for you a certain amount of time, or they have to pay you back. So I would set up a contract like that. So that's one option. And I really, really like training my own, so to speak. All of my trainers in my facility, I had at 13 instructors at any given time. They were, except for 2 of them, they were all people that I hired and then trained to become trainers. So that's one option. The other option is if you don't want to go that route, you just want to bring somebody in, then I would find somebody who already has education and certification of some sort. And again, there's a lot of schools out there now, and you really want to understand what philosophy the school has. So where a person went to school can tell you a little bit about how they might train. So that can help too. The other thing is there's education and then there's certification. And some schools will actually certify people. So that's awesome. You get certified by a school, so you could look for that. I actually also like to look for people who have independent certification, and that in the training arena is through the Certification Council of Professional Dog Trainers. So someone who's got a CPDT can tell you that the advantage to having someone who has a CCPDT, it does not guarantee that they're the greatest trainer in the world. I mean, that's like any certification. You could pass with a really high score, or you could pass with the lowest score, a passing score. So you do have to decide, you know, what the skill looks like. But the advantage to either education or certification, and ideally both, is they have done something to prove they've got some body of knowledge to make them capable of being a trainer. It's not a perfect solution. I would still I would still have them train some dogs so you can see how they work with dogs. I would ideally go to one of their classes and watch how they interact with dogs and people. So, because they have to be able to train, they have to be able to work with people too. So if you're just hiring someone off the street and you're not going to send them to school, then you might look for someone that's got education and certification already, so that they have some proven body of knowledge that maybe you can't test for, but an outside agency has. So if that makes sense. Anything on that, Susan, that you want to add?
Nope. I think you explained that well. Certification is great. But I also really like the career path of growing your own. And you may do a blend of those. You may get an experienced person in and then also grow your own, but you want to make sure they're going to be comfortable with that and helping those new people, if that's something you expect them to do, because not everyone may want to do that.
And then the other thing, a lot of people will ask us questions on, should they be an employee or an independent contractor? Those rules are really dictated by law. So it's really not up to you in a lot of ways, because it does depend on how you're using them as to what the law says you're supposed to classify them as. But the more important thing is, I've seen it work both ways. All of my trainers were employees. So everyone I hired was an employee of my company. But I have seen tons and tons of places where it worked, where the person was an independent contractor. I've also seen places where it works where you're just a third party organization training in a facility. So when I sold my daycare and I ended up training, and my entire staff ended up training in another daycare, we were neither. We were not employees of that daycare, and we were not contractors of that daycare. We were a company offering services at that daycare. And so there was a totally different financial arrangement, not based on being an employee or a contractor. So it's really up to you how you set up that arrangement. And it does take a little bit of coordination with the person that you're going to hire, or the team you're going to hire, or the company you're going to hire. So I think there's a lot of ways you can do it. I don't think there's any one perfect solution, everybody always wants the perfect solution. But I will say probably, go ahead, Susan.
Well, when we were at Urban Tales, we had our own trainers that were employees. And at the same time, we actually did rent out space to an independent trainer to come and do classes there just to get better utilization of our space. And she did do some referral to us from other services, but so we had both at the same time.
Yeah. So, and that's the other thing is I think my company, when I was working at that training facility, we did classes there, but we also did private lessons on our own. So I could still advertise my own services. So there's a lot of ways you can do that. I will say that you need to make it profitable and financially feasible for the trainer. So there does need enough income that you're helping that person make a living and not just being super stingy. But at the same time, you also want to work with them. I mean, really, this is all about communication. I would pull that person in and say, okay, this is why it helps to know what you want. So here's what I want: group classes, private lessons, whatever it is. Here's what I'm thinking I would do as the place where you're going to do the training with the people that you're going to train. And this is the work I'll do. This is the work you'll do, and split up some of the responsibility. Obviously, the trainer is going to come in and actually do the training and communicate the training message with the clients. But what does that mean? Are you requiring them to email the clients? Do they have to do any follow-up with the clients? Do they have to do any marketing themselves? Are they taking payments, or are you taking payments? So all of that stuff needs to be ironed out before you can come up with some decision as to, especially if we're going to be commission, what the commission might look like. So you have to figure all that out.
Yeah, if training is a new service to your business, I would really start with defining what does success for that revenue stream look like for you, as far as financially, client-wise, dogs. I mean, what is success? Because you want to be able to make sure you and the trainer are on the same page, and that you also set up benchmarks and measurements to ensure that happens.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time, what I've seen most frequently is employees who are paid hourly, and then I've also seen them people paid commission, and sometimes I've seen a mix of that. That's probably the most common. So I know people are going to say, like, what should the commission be? Normally, I've seen commission rates anywhere from 30 to 70%. And so it's a very wide range. I think some of that commission is going to depend on how much you're charging. I think some of it is going to depend on, again, how much work each person is doing, the daycare boarding facility versus the trainer, to come up with something realistic. And then you just remember, when you're figuring out those commission rates, that if the business, the daycare boarding business, is taking the payment, remember that you're already getting money taken off the top. You're paying, if you're doing any marketing or paperwork, it's your staff that's answering the phone or potentially taking the client payment. There's percentage of merchant fees coming out right off the top. So some of that money that you've already given up. So when you say, oh, we're just going to do 50-50 split, it's not 50-50 unless you're calculating it after expenses. So when you're figuring out that commission rate, remember that whoever is doing all that legwork already has some time and expense coming right off the top before you even get to the point of paying the other person. So you want to make sure that you're not giving away too much either. So making sure that there's compensation from both sides of the equation. All right, let me go through some questions a second. Let me scroll back up to the top. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, Suzanne had, so she's on, which is awesome. She's from animalbehaviorassociates.com. So they have some guidelines on finding a dog trainer, so you can definitely check out their resources there. Someone had said, yeah, so Suzanne said, I would have a trainer come in and do a demonstration with an untrained dog. What they say and what they do can be different things. So I do recommend having the trainer show you how they're going to teach something. And if you have pick any dog in your facility, don't necessarily make it the hardest dog, but that's what tends to happen. Here, if you can train this, you could train anything. Have that trainer show you how they would teach something. If the dog already knows how to do some things, just have them teach something else. They should be able to teach, at least go through the process of teaching any kind of behavior that a dog might not know. And if the trainer is already teaching classes, then I would recommend going in and sitting in on one of those classes, at least one, maybe more. Because again, you want to make sure they can train people, but our philosophy for hiring anybody, our number one tip to hiring anyone in your facility is hire nice people. So that goes for trainers too. I want a person who loves people. Most trainers love dogs. Some of them like people. Some of them can't stand people. And some of them love people. So really, you want a trainer that loves people. So I would go to their class and also just see how they're, some of those, what we call soft skills, how they come across. Because those are the things, just like with any new hire, those are the things that are harder to train somebody to do if they don't have it naturally. I can teach someone how to train a dog, but can't necessarily teach someone how to be nice. That's kind of my feeling. Let me see. So distinguishing between hiring someone to do basic training versus someone who's going to work with more complicated behaviors. So here's what I would say about that. Generally speaking, kind of Susan hit on it earlier, I would start with hiring people to do what most of your clients need, which for the most part is going to be manners, maybe some puppy stuff if you get a new puppy. I would focus on those things. I would focus on basic manners, pup training, potentially some fun stuff like tricks, and not do a lot of the behavior modification stuff. If you're working with a trainer who has more experience, and I would say, if this might be controversial because I have trainers on here who might not agree with this, but I'm just going to say it anyway. If you hire someone that has less than 4 years experience, I would not have doing any kind of behavior modification. So working with aggressive dogs, working with desensitization, can they do it? Maybe, but I would want a lot more experience, someone with much more experience in those areas before I would bring them on for those types of services. So that's just my personal opinion. You could disagree with me, but I would say hire someone and focus mainly on the behavior modification. I mean, the family pet dog training stuff, and then behavior modification, maybe those are the things you refer out to somebody outside your facility. And it might be somebody in that same training company, just not that particular trainer you're working with. So I would say that. But I think most people need basic manners and tricks and some fun stuff like that. All right, let me see. There's a little sad here. Okay, so this, here, I'm just gonna post this up. The trainer was in my puppy class with a foster puppy. She lifted the Boston puppy by the leash and pinned him to the wall. So thankfully you fired that person. So these would be kinds of things that I would not want my trainer to do. When we talk about making sure your philosophies match, that's horrible story. So I'm glad you did fire her. So Al, who's disguised as Valerie, his wife, says, can you recommend a school? So there's a lot of schools out there. I will say, and I'll put a link, APDT, the Association of Professional Dog Trainers, actually has put together a very comprehensive list of schools. And the list was actually populated. The answers to the questions on the list were populated by the school themselves. And it goes through a whole bunch of parameters in terms of their curriculum and what they teach and how they teach it and what their instructors look like and all that. So I would use that as a starting point. But the schools that I recommend, typically, there's a variety of online versus in-person. I was like, what's the word? That's not online. In-person schools. My slant or bias is positive training. So anything that I recommend is going to be in that realm. So I will caveat that as well. But I do like some of the schools that do sort of hands-on stuff are Victoria Stilwell, who I think actually now has a virtual component. The Catch Academy is online with a enhanced component. The Pat Miller Academy, which is all in person. She's up in Maryland. She has a training academy. Karen Pryor Academy is great. ABC is mostly online. So there's a lot of them out there though. So I won't say I hit all of them that I would recommend. If you have questions about a particular school, feel free to tag me and send me an email and say, hey, what do you think about this school? But I do think a great starting point is that school list that APDT has put together to just kind of see what the differences are between the school. And then there's a lot of places that, you can get the education, but then you still need to, at some point, practice with real dogs too. So not all of them offer that, but some of them do. So looking at ways you can get that hands-on training is important as well. I will say that certification, because a lot of people ask the question about how you get certified, to be a CCPDT, you actually have to have, I think last I checked, it was 300 hours of hands-on training before you can even sit for the certification exam. So in terms of looking for a school that will certify you, the school itself might certify you, but that independent certification, you do need 300 hours of training experience for that, which obviously takes a while to get. All right, so Portia said, if paying a trainer, what's a reasonable hourly rate in lieu of commission for general daily training related to work? So for any of you trainers that are on, if you want to throw out numbers, I will say my pay rate varied depending on the experience level of the person that I was paying. So, and whether or not they had education and certification. So I would range anywhere from, and this was like 15 years ago too, but anywhere from like $14 an hour for somebody with zero experience that's really learning, up to like $35 to $40 an hour for someone that's certified and pretty much self-sufficient, if that makes sense.
And what I recommend is, set up those pay ranges and what the qualifications are of when you get bumps, because that's going to help you and your trainer know what they need to do as far as experience and education to get to that next level. And it'll also help you kind of plot that out in your mind, because again, your fees may be higher for some of the things that a more experienced trainer will do versus something else. So the more you can plan this in advance, it will help. And if you get into the process and find that I can't find the type of trainer I want in these ranges, then you may have to adjust them and go up.
Yeah, and a couple of questions. We have some really good questions coming in, so that's awesome. Katie mentioned that when she interviews experienced trainers, she watches them work with their own dog first and watch the engagement they have with their dog. Is their dog enjoying what they're doing? Is their dog responsive and happy? I love this. This is awesome, Katie. Is there a lot of verbal/physical praise for the dog? If that goes well, I have them work with a puppy, a hyper dog, and a laid back dog, and then do a 2-week trial basis before permanently hiring. And then they prefer to teach their own trainers. So I love that. I often say that if you did nothing but just understood canine body language, which for all of our people that follow the Dog Gurus, obviously, that's a huge area of focus for Susan and I. Like, we want everybody to understand canine body language. If you just look through the lens of the dog and what the dog is saying, that should tell you whether or not this person, is effective in keeping the dog happy and hopefully teaching the dog something. So I love that, Katie, that you're talking about kind of looking at that engagement with their own dog. I also did have people work for me. Typically for my facility, they did have to shadow some classes and kind of do assistant training stuff before we brought them on full time. So this is another great opportunity when you're hiring and you're trying to establish that pay. To go back to what Susan was saying, is maybe you start them out at a lower rate with less responsibility, but then say, if this works out, you're kind of doing it almost on a project basis of saying, we'll do this 6-week class and this will be your role, and we'll see how that goes. And then as we get more comfortable working together, we'll adjust the pay accordingly. So you're not necessarily having to hire them for, a permanent length of time. So I think that's a really good way to look at it. I also think it is super important to have that career path for them. So giving them that opportunity to say, like for my instructors, they started out generally as assistant instructors, and then they could move to primary instructor, which usually took a year because these were people that didn't have any experience to begin with. So it usually took at least a year for them to do primary instructing training. And that was usually still with somebody else that could take over if they got stuck or got, confused or whatever. But then that was only for certain classes. So usually just our basic classes, our basic manners classes. And then with more experience and more education, they could move up to doing evaluations or behavior modification, or be able to go do in-home lessons. So, and there was obviously a pay increase as they moved up through that track. So definitely have some kind of career path, because that's what people want. They want a way to figure out how to get to the next level. At least the ones that are really good want that. So
Our A-team people. And
exactly.
You're all looking for A-team people.
So Sonia said, how are so many baby trainers less than 2 years able to become CPDT? Well, I do think people under 2 years could have 300 hours of of training time and take the CPTT exam and pass it. And I think they would be better trainers than somebody you just grabbed off the street and said, can you train my dog? Because they have at least had 300 hours and some education in order to know enough to pass the exam. But would I give those people separation anxiety or aggression cases or desensitization? No, I wouldn't. But I would probably feel comfortable, assuming that, you know, work with dogs and they seem to be able to do that. I would be comfortable giving them time to, giving them a job doing some basic manners training. I think the most important part is the trainer really has, and to some extent you as the pet care facility owner need to have a little bit of education to understand when a dog is kind of outside the norm. Like when you get a dog that wants basic manners training and then you see it and you go, that you don't need basic manners training, you need behavior modification, because your dog is actually responding the way it is because it's got fear or aggression or whatever going on. So that's where you have to make sure the trainer understands what boundaries they have and based on their skill level, if that makes sense.
And I think that's a great conversation to have as part of your interview process. As you know, at what point do you feel like you don't have the skill set and would refer cases somewhere else? And you can kind of balance what they say with what their background and training and experience level is to see if you're comfortable with that. Because I do think that is where you're going to get into potential problems with your clients, is if you're trying to match, or a trainer is taking on a case that they're really not ready to do yet.
Yeah, and so Katie mentioned she pays $11 to $12 for beginner trainers that work part-time in the kennel also, and then $13 to $15 when they don't need daily supervision, $15 and higher if they do client evaluations and private lessons. So there's a range there again as they get more experience and have more responsibility. And then Andrew was asking about how to involve the trainer in marketing and bringing in clients. And then also talked a little bit, he has another comment where he talks about, you know, teaching them and then they go on and take their clients on their own, and whether or not you do non-competes. So for the not dealing with the non-compete thing, and then we'll go back to the training, marketing and bringing in clients. I started out with non-competes and then I eventually got rid of them because I just felt like, I don't know, I just felt like I didn't need to do them anymore. I never had a problem with people taking, you know, starting their own business. I will say that the majority of trainers, dog trainers that I had they had jobs doing something else. And Amber and I were talking about this the other day, that they weren't people that were going to quit their job and start their own business. So that may have been why I didn't have people that ended up doing that. Most of mine were people who love dogs, love training, wanted to do it as a part-time gig, but weren't trying to open their own business. So I do think that's a conversation you need to have. And I do think that if you can do a non-compete, it can help. But the way I feel is the non-compete's probably going to keep the honest people honest. And I'm not sure it's going to do anything for anybody else. So it is kind of a catch-22. I think a lot of lawyers will tell you that non-competes are hard to enforce. And then your non-compete it can't be really unreasonable. It has to be a very limited location in terms of radius from your facility, and it has to be a reasonable amount of time. It can't be like 12 years. It has to be usually 1 or 2. So in order to be even possible to enforce it. But I think that's a lot of conversation. It's the same as really hiring anybody. It's a conversation you really have to have with that individual of like, what are your goals and how can I help you get to those goals? And really, if their goal is to open their own facility or their own training studio, then maybe still bring them on, but now you have to have a succession plan if they do leave.
Yeah, and we did that. I mean, we hired someone that we knew their long-term goal was to go out on their own. But if you think about, as you said, Robin, when they're fresh out of school, how many years of experience they need to really be ready to do that, you could get a lot of production from somebody and kind of support a win-win opportunity. So it really, again, you've got to look at what's right for your business and what's right for the person and how big is your talent pool. So I think it's making all the pieces of the puzzle fit together and being very clear about expectations and what you want and keeping those lines of communication open so that they don't leave with 1 month's notice or something. I mean, I've had where our agreements with someone like that was like, okay, I want 90 days notice so we have time to backfill. Or you got multiple people on the team to where it's not that going to hurt that much. It's not where you're depending on one person. And I think it's always hard to put your eggs in one basket in any of these jobs like trainers and groomers that's highly skilled and specialized. If you can have at least two, that's even better so that you don't feel like you're left in the lurch.
If you want to really, if you scale, having more is going to help anyway. So if you start to see your business growing and your client base growing in terms of those services, you want to be able to expand. So it doesn't get limited just by that one person, whether it's grooming, training, pet sitting, whatever. I think for all of those, I think that's important. So yeah, Suzanne kind of mentioned the same thing. A newly minted CPD TKA is not necessarily qualified to work with behavior problems. So that's, you know, pretty much the same thing that I said. That classification doesn't mean you can teach everything out there because you have to get other training. That initial CPD TKA, which means knowledge assessed, means they understand a basic body of knowledge to become a trainer. Doesn't necessarily mean they have all the skills they need to really do advanced stuff. And I mean, the other thing I guess I should just throw out there just for the clarification of terms is the term behaviorist, which some trainers will use, is not a, I'm trying to say things nicely, trying to be politically correct or whatever. That's a term that is not necessarily defined. Veterinary behaviorist is. A veterinary behaviorist is a veterinarian doctor who actually is also able to do behavior training, behavior modification type of stuff. And typically what that means is they're also able to prescribe medicine because they're a vet, they're a DMD. But just calling yourself a behaviorist could just mean that you are a dog trainer that happens to know enough to do behavior. So when I've been training for 20 years, I do feel qualified to work on behavior modification, but I call myself a dog trainer. I don't call myself a behaviorist because it's really a confusing and it's a misleading term. So I don't like to use that term because it really doesn't have a defined meaning. So if someone comes in and says, I'm able to do this because I'm a behaviorist, I would ask a little bit more about what that actually means to them and why they call themselves that. So that is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but there's no definition of it, like a legal definition or whatever you want to call it. What other questions? Let me see. Oh, so Karen had asked, do you have a form for clients to fill out for the trainer or facility owners to review prior to allowing them into your training program? So if you just can clarify that, Karen, because I don't know if you mean like to hire them or a liability form or what exactly you mean. I was just a little bit confused by that question. And then Katie said, this is sort of what Susan was alluding to as well. And what we're saying about kind of compensation overall is that if you pay trainers well, it can keep them from going out on their own. I make it a point to discuss the cost of running a dog training business, especially the cost of insurance. And I think that goes into the whole open communication. So making sure that they understand what you're providing versus what they're providing, I think is critical. And then I just remembered that I did not go back to Andrew's other question.
I was going to say, that's going to be a good, I think that circles back to that one really well, because, trainers make money when they're training, and they may not be making money when they're out marketing or getting clients unless you build that payment structure in there. So I think that's a discussion. Is that something they really want to do and would be good at? Or is it better for the business to do the marketing? I mean, I think it's all negotiable, but you got to be on the same page and have clarity in your agreement.
Yeah, and I think that's another one for most people that do dog training. They want to deal with the dogs. They want to work with the dogs. So they don't necessarily, I think making sure that a trainer knows if they go out on their own, all the other stuff they're going to have to do will leave less time to do the training for the dog. So that can be a reason that a lot of trainers will stay with a company. But in terms of involving them in some of that, I do think that the more they're willing to do to help market and promote the program to bring in new clients, then the more they could potentially get with the commission. So that's where I do think you have a little bit of leeway to work with them. But then you have to be really clear on what you're expecting from them. Like, do you expect them to travel to every vet's office and drop off flyers? Or do you expect them to call a certain number of people and make connections with people? Or do you expect them to go to, pet expos and do training demos? Like, you have to decide what it's going to look like so that everybody's clear on what their side of the bargain is if you're going to pay commission. And then I would make sure, as with anything, you want to track some key metrics to know if it's working, because you could have that person, let's say you tell them to make 10 phone calls a week and bring in clients. They might be doing those 10 phone calls a week and not a single client signs up, but you're still paying them a commission unless you are able to track based on your phone call, these people signed up, and those are the people you get commission on. So you have to have some parameters in terms of from a business standpoint when you bring these people on. And I think that's when a lot of pet care facilities will tell me, I can't find a trainer, like there's no trainers out there. There are tons of trainers out there, I'm just telling you. And right now, trainers, just like the rest of the pet care industry, the COVID has affected their businesses as well. So very likely you can find a trainer who is looking to generate more revenue. But what they probably don't want to do and don't feel comfortable doing is walking to a brand new facility and creating an entire program for that and telling you how much they should pay and setting all the rules. Like, they need some guidance. So most of the time when I see that you haven't been able to hire a trainer, and then I say, well, what were you looking for? And they're like, I just want someone to come in and start training. That's probably a step too far for most trainers. That's not what most trainers are looking for. But if you can say, if let's say it's a trainer who already has a 6-week program, if you can say, I want you to bring your 6-week program into my facility and I'll promote it to these clients, then you're going to have a little bit of an easier time bringing that trainer in. But again, like Susan mentioned earlier, kind of start small. Don't bring them in and say, like, I want you to do 8,000 things unless you have really a plan for them, because otherwise you're really asking a lot of that individual. So you have to really be fair.
And what we did is, as our training program grew, we evolved to have a training manager position. And then once I had a training manager, part of their job description was I did expect them to do marketing and sales of client and training services and manage the trainer team. And so their pay structure was different, but that wasn't until we had, a bigger training revenue stream that would justify having a dedicated training manager. So you can, build that into the future, because training can be a big revenue stream if you have a good sized client base to pull from. And I think if training is new to you, one tip on marketing is to create separate advertising and posts that only talk about training. Don't say, I'm a dog daycare that does lodging, grooming, and training now. That's going to get lost. You've got to target your marketing just for the needs of your training and market that service separate.
Yeah, and I would do that really for all your services. I would make sure that if you're a multi-service shop, which many of you guys are, I would make sure you're always focusing you could do the generic, like we're a multi-service shop occasionally, but I would also have specific marketing targeted towards every service stream you have. So grooming, training, lodging, daycare, whatever, because it does people. I mean, I always did daycare and training, and there would be times that I swear my daycare clients were like, I had no idea you did training. I'm like, how could you not know we did training? But then when you think about it, they like my two staffs were completely separate. My trainers, only one of them ever worked in the daycare. So it was like two separate companies in a way. So training always happened weekends and evenings. Daycare happened during the day. So when I thought about it, I was like, well, she only comes Monday through Friday. And apparently I stink at promoting training services the right way. You mean, it was just kind of comical because that happened more than once before I realized that I really needed to be proactive, making sure that all of my daycare clients knew I had training and all my training clients knew I had daycare. So it's the same. I would do that for all of your services. All right. Any other questions? Is there anything I left out for now, Susan?
I don't know. I want to talk about a little bit because Robin said at the very beginning that we've done a session, like a daycare and training partnership. And that was kind of the philosophy we had at my pet business, is that they were a great fit. And really, well, what we would joke is we would break the dogs in daycare and then they would get training. But that was just an internal joke. But I do think they work well together. But when you're hiring someone, if you are expecting them to help with your daycare and help with your staff members that are running your daycare, you need to make that clear up front, because again, how are you going to compensate them for spending that internal time training versus if they are actually training clients and training dogs, and do they want to do both? Because I think Robin will be one of the first ones to tell you a lot of trainers don't want to work or have anything to do with daycare. So if that's your expectation, you've got to have that clear and a compensation structure set up, because we would pay an hourly wage for time they spent either helping with dog evaluations or helping to train the daycare staff that was separate from the time they spent training dogs. You can't expect them to do that for no pay. And I think that's one of the biggest things that's going to hold you back from getting a really good trainer, is if you aren't being fair in your compensation for what you're expecting them to do.
Yeah, and I will tell you, my trainers, I had one out of 20 over the years that I hired that wanted to be in the daycare. Most of my trainers would run the other way if you said, who wants to come work in the daycare? Now, I will tell you, as a trainer who's done daycare, you will learn more supervising a few hours of daycare about body language than you will learn in like years of training. I'm just telling you, in terms of that particular skill, in terms of canine body language education, it's great. But I know that's just not a thing that a lot of trainers want to do. So I would definitely agree with what Susan's saying, that evaluating dogs for daycare is not the same as evaluating a dog for, like, does this dog fit into your family? So even hiring a trainer to do your dog evaluations isn't necessarily something that trainer is going to be equipped to do if they've never worked in a daycare. So you really have to balance what's fair for the trainer. And then Susan, if you're having them do some of that, I think trainers are great at educating staff. I think teaching the staff to know and understand how they might be accidentally teaching the dogs to do inappropriate behaviors is really a great use of your trainer. So doing some kind of in-service programs where that trainer can talk a little bit about how dogs learn and how you can enforce good behavior through the things that you're doing in the daycare, I think is awesome. I think having trainers that can help with when you have a dog that is having a problem in daycare and may need some additional training, then obviously you would refer to the trainer for that. So that can be a great partnership as well. But don't necessarily think you want to work in the daycare or spend a lot of time in the daycare. So Karen kind of clarified that question she asked earlier about she had a dog enter a facility and go for the throat of a daycare worker when he went to pick up a food bowl, not a dog in training program, but just dangerous. I'd like to make sure dogs coming in for day training don't have that problem, but will put my trainers in danger. Finding out in advance will help create an appropriate program. So in that sense, I would have some type of an evaluation. Most trainers will have some type of evaluation form that a pet parent is going to fill out. And very much like in daycare, if you have a good daycare evaluation form, like Susan and I have actually gone into consulting clients. We've gone into pet care facilities where they've said, we have all these problems with our daycare. And then we'll say, let us just see the evaluation for the dogs that you have here today. And then we'll go, this dog shouldn't be here. This dog shouldn't be here. This dog shouldn't be here. Like we haven't even seen the dogs yet. We just know based on the evaluation that certain dogs aren't going to be good in daycare. So trainers similarly should have an evaluation form, and you're not going to gain every single bit of knowledge about that dog, but there should be enough on that form that for a lot of trainers, you'll get red flags as to what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And that's a good question to ask the trainer, is how they do kind of screen dogs for, what's a good dog that they're capable of working with. Because again, you're trying to look for those family pet manners of issues, not the aggression issues. So I would have a form for that. And then that whoever is getting hired, whether it's a trainer, a groomer, lobby staff, a kennel worker, whatever, everybody should go through some minimum type of training in your facility on bare minimum requirements for how you deal with dogs. So everybody should understand not to go into an enclosure with a dog, everybody by themselves. Everybody should understand, how to handle a dog when you're walking through your facility. Everybody should understand when it's safe to get a food bowl away from a dog, which usually is after the dog leaves the enclosure. But so you should have that type of training for anybody, some minimum training for anybody that comes in your facility, so you don't have something happen. Just like if there's policies on where dogs are allowed to walk, and if you do boarding off-leash play for some dogs and then not for other dogs, you have to have a policy for how you make sure those dogs don't get mixed. And your trainer needs to know those same things, because they need to understand how your facility operates as well.
Well,
training.
Yeah, I think that goes back to, as a facility, again, looking big picture, what dogs are acceptable to have in your center, and then what questions do you ask to ensure that what you can manage safely are the only dogs that come in? And if they don't fit that criteria, what questions are you asking, or what forms are being filled out? I mean, we started with daycare and cage-free sleepovers and added traditional lodging second. And since we had already gotten a profile form on all the dogs that were coming to daycare, we had a similar one for any dog that was coming in for day lodging or training, just because our center was not equipped to handle any dogs that had aggression. And so that was just part of our screening process of who we were. You don't have to be all things to all people. So define what's acceptable, and then set up the process, whether it's a form or questions you ask for new clients, to try to determine that up front.
Yeah, and I would say for the majority of pet care facilities who do not already have a trainer, like Katie's facility, Katie is a trainer and she owns the facility. I'm not talking about those kind of facilities. So facilities where you have no trainer on staff, you are not a trainer yourself, and you want to bring in a trainer, I would start with having that trainer work with the dogs you currently have. And you are going to market to your community, but I would venture to say the first few classes that person has are probably going to be dogs that you already know. And those are the dogs that come in and the owner's like, oh, he never sits at home. It's a great opportunity to go, hey, you know what? We have a trainer who can do some refresher training with your dog and help them to learn that behavior. Or the owner that gets dragged into the facility and then complains that, they can't walk their dog or whatever. The things people say to you in your lobby where you're just kind of looking at them going, why don't you get training? Those are the clients you just start to have conversations with, because you already know their dogs. So you're not in as big of a liability situation at that point. And that also helps you to kind of see how well the trainer is going to work with those dogs and those clients and that kind of thing. So I think the places that I've seen that have added training in that sense, that's where they've usually started, is really with working with those clients that they already know. And then I would talk to the person about how they're screening clients that are coming in. Like Susan said, if it's a dog that has aggression issues, you don't have to bring that dog in. Like maybe that's one you say to the trainer, okay, you can train that dog somewhere else, like at your own facility. but you might want to be able to do it. But you have to make sure you have policies that if you have a dog there that is aggressive, there's policies to keep the rest of your staff safe too. So there's a lot to consider when you start going down that route, which is why I would not start there. I would start with the fun stuff, like basic manners and tricks. That's what I would start with.
And you can make a lot of revenue with basic manners and puppies and not even doing privates. I mean, and the fun stuff, tricks and stuff like that. I mean, you can have a really good revenue stream if you have a pretty good client base without doing everything. You don't have to do all aspects of training and meet everything. Find your niche, what fits your clients or a client base. If you are trying to attract a new client base in, that's one you want. That is your ideal client.
And then I would just make sure that you are, that your trainer knows your services. So if they do get questioned about other services, they can help you to sell those other services. And you have to make sure that your lobby staff, whoever answers the phone, they understand what the trainer is doing so that you don't get that like log jam of, oh, well, the trainer's not here. I can't tell you what their group class looks like or what they do in there. You want to make sure you're training both of those on both ends to be able to refer services in your facility. So you're generating revenue around the outsides of whatever specific specialty that person is signed up for. So I think that definitely is important as well. All right, so hopefully that helps a little. I know it's a lot of information and we're happy to answer questions that you might have. Just send us an email and we'll try to steer you in the right direction. Amber Burkhalter, who is one of our coaches, she's also a past chair of the Association of Professional Dog Trainers, as am I. I'm also one of the past chairs of APDT. How ironic is that both of us are working together and we were both past chairs of APDT, but she's actually going to put together, we're hoping that she's going to put together more information on all of this to kind of take people through how to hire. And it's not going to be ready for like tomorrow, but hopefully later this month into next month, we'll be able to provide some more information about all this. And as you start bringing on trainers, if you have questions, we're happy to help to, facilitate any conversations or help to steer you in a direction. If your trainer is saying, what about this? And you're not sure, and you just want clarification on what the trainer might be telling you, I'm happy to answer those questions. Schools that to go to or techniques to use or whatever. Like, I'm happy to answer any of those questions. Training is a big part of who I am. And I'm also very passionate about training dogs well and without fear. So I'm happy to answer any of those questions as well. Anything else we should add, Susan?
I'm going to add just one last thing. Think about when you're recruiting a trainer. So you're trying to tell them why they should be a part of your business. And so think about all the pros from their perspective, that if their passion is really working with dogs and not having to go out and get clients, then you're going to do that part for them. Like Katie said, they're not going to have to pay all these costs, because some trainers, then they go out and do their own business and they're having to spend majority of their time running their business versus training dogs. So you've got to kind of look at this as a sales pitch as to what you're going to do for them and why they should want to be a part of your business and part of your team.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would also not rule out virtual training right now, since we can't do as much in person. You may even just for temporarily find a trainer that might not even, don't call me, just that's my caveat, because I don't have time. But I would say, if you have a trainer that might not even be in the same city you're in, that could do virtual lessons with your clients right now, that might be a way to bridge the gap right now and generate revenue for you and for that trainer who might need clients right now as well. But then you're not restricted geographically. So if you know a trainer that's in another part of the country or even the world, if the time zone would work out, you could start virtual lessons right now too. So that there's potential there to get some revenue started relatively quickly if you can find somebody that's willing to do that for you. So I think that's another option. I'm going to check out some webinars. I think for the pet care facility owners who don't know anything about trainers, I was going to try to go to APDT and pick out some webinars that I would say just at least watch these couple so you have a little bit of knowledge about training before you bring a trainer in. That might just help you to be able to talk the language or kind of see their perspective, which I think would help just as an educational point for pet care facility owners. So I'm going to try to go do that today, and then I'll add those resources later in the comments. And I guess that's it. If you have questions about this, give us a call or let us know. We'll be happy to talk to you. Otherwise, have a great rest of your, what's today? Friday.
The weekend.
Yeah. And
hopefully you have if you got lodging out there, hopefully you got dogs coming in.
Exactly. All right. Talk to you guys later.